So good morning again, everyone. My name's Lynn Lavery. I'm the director here at Academic Consulting. Academic Consulting offers a range of different services, but one of the things that we're very focused on across those services is we like to make researchers' lives easier. And so we always believe there's a more efficient way to do things and love sort of communicating that to our clients. One of the pleasures of finding clever ways to do tasks as part of your research is that it means you reach your research goals faster, probably with less headaches, and hopefully with a better standard of work at the end of it also. And so that's really what today's session is all about. How can you use reference management software to make your lives easier for your next research project? Now, I'm very curious to find out why people are attending today's session. So I thought I'd start with a quick poll. And while we're doing the poll, I'll just tell you a little bit about how I had the idea for today's session. So I'm just launching the poll on your screen at the moment. Now, some of the options refer to RMS, that stands for Reference Management Software. So the options we have there, you're perhaps not currently using RMS. You're maybe not happy with the current application you're using. Might be you're having issues with your current reference management software. Might be your supervisor, or in some cases perhaps your lecturer, told you you need to improve your referencing. And I can see from the class list that in some cases that lecturer may be me. So welcome to my Bioscience Enterprise students that are joining us today. And last option there is around that you think you need to improve your workflow between your reference management software and other systems that you use. So just giving you a few moments to select that. While you are making the appropriate choice, let's get underway by me telling you where the idea for today's session came from. So here at Academic Consulting, we do a lot of work with clients who are perhaps PhD students or postgraduate students, and they're in the final stages of submitting their thesis. And we help them with the formatting, the proofreading, and the reference checking. Likewise, we offer similar services for academics. So perhaps it's an academic who's got a technical report they need to produce, or alternatively a journal article, and we offer the same range of services. Now, often when we're initially contacted about working on the document, we're told that the referencing won't be a problem at all. There's no issues at all with it. And when we look, we notice there are in fact significant issues with the document, and the referencing needs a serious look at. Now, when we go back to the particular researcher concerned and mention this, they often say to us, but my referencing can't be wrong. I used reference management software. That's meant to do everything correctly. And the bad news is, just because you use software doesn't mean that you're actually going to end up with accurate reference lists. So software is only as good as the person driving it, and it's only as good as the information that you've entered into it. So that was partly where the idea for today's session came from. It was around making it clear that there's more to reference management software than meets the eye, and that if you are going to be using it for your research, you need to know what some of the ins and outs are so that you can use it effectively. Other reasons for today's session, we do have a lot of clients come to us and say that they are not using reference management software. And in fact, I often ask in my training courses who is using a reference management application, and I've noticed that the use of them is on the decline. Now, when I inquire about that, people often say it's too hard to use or it doesn't work for them properly. There's a range of different reasons why they've decided not to use reference management software. Now, generally speaking, in most cases, I hate to have to say it, but it's usually user error at fault. There's very little wrong with these packages, but if you don't know how to use them correctly, you're right, it is going to cause you all sorts of problems with your reference lists. So part of the reason for today's session is also around making that clear around effective use. My last reason for offering it is the one-on-one work I do with clients. I'm regularly seeing people in quite a pickle. So this is mostly around their file management, and I'm thinking here in relation to full text PDF articles that they may have downloaded. And they end up with quite a inconsistent workflow that they're working with, and it results in PDFs and being all sorts of places within their computer system. So that's something else that I'm hoping to target today. Now, just a couple notes before I show you the result of that poll. Today isn't a how-to guide as to how to use reference management software. So I'm not going to be getting into the technical side of any of the 4 packages that we'll be covering. I may occasionally be giving an example from one of the 4 software applications that we're talking about, but I won't be getting into the sort of technical specific how-to side of things. Today's really about general principles. And my last comment, I was joking in the office yesterday that today's webinar is either going to be, in terms of the content, it's either going to be the kind of thing you'll find absolutely fascinating or really, really boring. And your reaction to that is going to be quite dependent, I think, on your personality type. So that's a whole webinar in itself, which we won't get into, but I just thought I'd make that comment up front. Now, on that note, let's close this poll and I'll share those results with you. So that's really interesting. We've got just over a third of you actually aren't using reference management software. So part of today's session is going to be around why you might choose to use it and what your options are. So I think those of you that are in that first option, and also those that perhaps aren't happy or have issues with your current system, there's certainly lots in today's webinar for you today. Got a few people who are in need of improving their referencing, and just under a third have said that it's around their workflow between their RMS and other systems. So they're probably the kind of person I was just talking about with the PDFs in multiple places. That's wonderful. Thanks for that, everyone. We do have a few of those polls that I'll be bringing up today. We do like to keep these sessions as interactive as we possibly can. Now, my slide around what the options are, this slide moved multiple times in my presentation while I was presenting it. I was intending to cover this later, but inevitably some of my initial slides, I am going to be referring to these 4 packages. So it was a little bit of a chicken and egg scenario. Really, I need to at least mention these up front so that when I refer to them in the first half of today, you know what it is I'm talking about. Now, while I am talking through these, for those of you, and it would be just over 2 or just under 2/3 of you that are currently using reference management software, be keen to know which of these 4 you are using. So I'll just bring that up on the screen now. So I bought these 4 that I'm currently talking about, and there's another option. So if you are using another RMS, do feel free to indicate that. If you are not currently using software, feel free to just ignore that poll while I'm talking. So in terms of, I often refer to these as the big 4 for referencing software. They are very much the 4 most commonly used packages. EndNote was the first of these to gain widespread popularity, and it was certainly the software that I first started with many, many moons ago. It's licensed commercial software that's produced by Thomson Reuters. So in other words, it's software that you do need to pay for unless your organisation has a license for it. Of note, the web version is now available free of charge, but certainly the desktop version, it can be a little pricey to purchase if your organisation doesn't already have a license. Zotero. Zotero is definitely my package of choice, and those of you that know me will be aware of that. Zotero is a free open source reference management application. It's developed by George Mason University in the US, and I jokingly call it EndNote on steroids. So it does everything EndNote does, but it's a much more intuitive format. And it has some really nice additional features that suggest they were really thinking of researchers. when they developed it. Zotero wasn't popular with the EndNote folks when it was released. Thomson Reuters actually took them to court. They insisted that Zotero had been reversed engineered from EndNote. The case was dismissed, and Zotero has continued to go from strength to strength since. It looks like everyone's voted on that poll now. Thanks for that. I'll show that shortly when I finish discussing these. Now, RefWorks is another commercial package, and it's currently produced by a business unit within ProQuest. It's probably the least user-friendly and least popular of the 4 packages we're covering today. I must admit I'm slightly perplexed as to why so many universities here in New Zealand have been changing over to it when Zotero and Mendeley are such strong alternatives, and they're free. But nonetheless, if you are based at University of Auckland, Otago or Victoria University, it's entirely possible that RefWorks is going to be the package that is recommended to you. Last option there, Mendeley. They had some very odd marketing material when it was first released. They describe it as the most fun you could have with your pants on, which I thought was a really awful way to describe a reference management software application. Similar to Zotero, Mendeley is free. It's originally developed by 3 German PhD students, but it's now owned by Elsevier, and that was a move that was very criticised by the academic community. But nonetheless, Mendeley is a very popular package. It has some great functionality. I mentioned earlier that Zotero is absolutely my favourite, but if I had to choose something else from that slide, Mendeley would definitely be my second choice. Now, it looks like the 2/3 of you who are using reference management software did vote while I was talking, so thanks for that. I'll just share with the group so that you can see. So that makes for interesting reading. So we've got over half of you are current EndNote users. A very small percentage are Zotero, hoping I might convert a few people over to that today. And we've got just under 1/3 are RefWorks users. So thanks for that, folks. That's really helpful information for me. So why use software is probably a good place to start. So if you're not currently using reference management software, then you really need to be. In terms of saving time and improving accuracy of your citations and your reference lists, they're an absolute must-have. So they have what we call Cite While You Write features. That means that while you are working in your word processor, instead of typing Smith 2015 into your document, you jump across to the software that you're using, you pick the Smith citation from your database, and you insert it into your word processor document from there. Your reference management software, whichever of those packages that happens to be, will then format the in-text citation in a reference style of your choosing, and it will include it in a reference list at the end of the document. So in terms of you keeping track of what's been cited and what hasn't, and in terms of you having really accurately formatted citations, reference management software, I think, is an absolute must-have. Now, with technology advances, it is incredibly quickly to get information into your reference management software. I started out with EndNote, as I mentioned earlier. Somewhat embarrassingly, it was EndNote 2 that I started on. We're now up to EndNote X7, so that's pretty much 17. I always cringe every time they bring a new version out. But back on version 2, we actually had to manually enter our citation information in. So it all had to be typed up and entered into the database. These days with software, we can actually just be doing an internet search. We can be on the university library databases, and with a click of a few buttons, our citation information comes into our own personal database. Now, it's not quite as straightforward as that, as I will be talking about this morning, but I'll leave that one there for now. They're an excellent way to organise your references in your PDFs, which makes them a very good personal database. So they have the capacity to have notes and keywords entered. Those notes, keywords, and the other citation information is searchable. And if you are working with a large number of references, I can see from the list today that a number of you are postgraduate thesis students. You are likely to have quite a big number of citations to be dealing with. So it's a very effective way to manage those. And lastly, for those of you that are attending today that aren't students, you may be interested in the ability to share your reference database with others. And if you are working in a collaborative context, that's a really good reason to use the software. So that all sounds marvellous, doesn't it? So it does beg the question, what's the problem? And I think that picture on that slide sums the problem up really well. Because it is so easy to get your information into these database packages, we think it's a magic wand. So click of a few buttons, your citations are there, they're magically appearing in your word processing document. Surely the software is doing all the work for you. And that's actually not the case. You actually need to be driving it well in order for it to format your information appropriately. I often hear people say, my supervisor said my referencing was wrong, it's RefWorks' fault, or EndNote's hopeless, it didn't format my references correctly. The issue in all of those cases is actually the original information that's been entered, not the reference management software. So if I had to sum up the issues that we see here at Academic Consulting on a regular basis, it would be these 6. So rather than going through this slide in detail, I'll jump straight into covering each one of these in turn. I have a series of slides that covers each one. So let's start with errors in citation information. So software is only as good as the information that you enter in. So there's a number of different possible problems that might occur. It might be that you have magically entered your information in and you have missing citation information. You might have incorrect information has come across, and I'm going to be giving you some examples shortly of those. It could actually also be that you're inputting the information not from an original source. And I think it's really important that you don't trust Google or alternatively other authors' presentations. So let's take a look at this by way of example. So just take a moment, folks, to have a look at that citation and the information that it has. So that's a correct citation. Now, let's take a look at what happens when we look at that in Google. So these are the first 4 Google results that came up. Now, the red entries are incorrect. The green ones are correct. So that basically means the first 2 citations that came up are actually showing incorrect reference information. Now, chances are you're probably going to pick the first 1 or 2 that you see, and you would transfer that across into your reference management software. That's clearly going to be problematic. If we think about why we reference, obviously part of referencing is around acknowledging other people's work and showing respect for others' authors by acknowledging their work. But one of the other reasons that we reference information or cite information is so that other authors can look up those references if they'd like to read more. And so if you're including incorrect reference information in your reference list, there's a couple problems. One is it's obviously going to make you look like a sloppy researcher, which isn't ideal. But secondly, anyone who's reading your work is going to be unable to locate the original reference because you haven't provided the information for it. I know for myself as a researcher, I find that really frustrating. So I'm reading a piece of work, I see an article, I think, gosh, I'd really like to look at that in more detail. I go to the reference list and I can't actually quickly find the file because they have the wrong issue number, journal number, or perhaps page range. So it's actually quite an important thing to get right. And if it's inputted incorrectly into your reference management software, well, there's not a lot that can be done to fix that up at a later stage. Just on that note, when we were preparing for today's webinar, I was having a bit of a brainstorming session with my colleague Andrew, and we were talking about this reliance on results from Google to have reference information generated in your EndNote library or otherwise. And when we got back to our desks, this this email was in our inbox. So I'll just give you a moment to read that. So this is a really common issue that we see. This poor person literally about to submit her thesis. She's been told that the references that she downloaded directly from Google Scholar are actually incorrect, and she's got a very limited time frame to now go through and fix those up. In case anyone's wondering, that is in fact a service that we offer, so if you are in that situation yourselves, we can help you out with that. But that's quite stressful, discovering that sort of thing at the last minute, particularly when you think that you have actually got accurate information in there. So what's the moral of the story? Don't take the results of a preview from search engines as being accurate. Now, in that example that I showed you on screen, if you actually clicked through to the original page, they were actually cited correctly, but it was just the preview results that were the problem. So really the moral of the story is you should always consult the original source, but definitely not taking the results of previews. Likewise, don't trust secondary sources. That same article that I gave you the reference for, there were actually also 2 published books that we found that incorrectly referenced in. So it's not just an internet phenomena. It's not just a case of, the internet actually being wrong. God forbid. Sometimes published work actually has errors too. So when you are bringing your information across into your reference management software, take a look at it. Every import you do, you're checking to see if it's complete, and you're also checking for things like capitalization, which is the next thing that I'm going to move across onto. Now, the question panel's been very quiet, so do feel free as I'm going through to pop any questions or comments that you have. So issue number 2, failing to be consistent. Now I'm going to start out by talking about capitalization, and I am about to get you guys to vote on what the correct capitalization on those references is. But let me just talk about that by way of background first. And I'm talking about capitalization partly in the context of consistency. So most reference styles, and I'm going to use APA as an example here, American Psychological Association, they have rules around how your information should be capitalized. So in APA format, for example, your journal names are title case, and title case means that all of the major words are capitalized. The actual names of the articles are sentence case. So that means the first letter and any proper nouns are capitalized. Now that seems like a really simple rule, but it does get confusing because book titles, the titles of the books are actually sentence case. It's just the first word that's capitalized. So that's just an example for you of the kinds of things you need to know about your reference style. Now, the reason that's important is while these software applications do have some capacity to change capitalisation, either in your database or in the reference list that you output, it can be a little bit hit and miss. And a really good example of that is the issue of proper nouns. So you can ask EndNote or Zotero or one of the others to change your case to sentence case, but then it's going to have a lowercase letter for all of the proper nouns. So the golden rule for using reference management software is get your capitalisation right from the outset. Now, I'm about to ask you which of those three is correct for APA. So I'll just repeat that rule for capitalising journal articles. So in APA format, the title of the journal itself, that's title case. All the major words are capitalised. The title of the article is sentence case. So sentence case is the first letter and any proper nouns. Make a decision. Which of those three has the correct capitalisation for APA format? And I'll just launch that now. Ooh, we've got a smart bunch today. The vote's coming in very, very quick. Just give you another little bit of time. Okay, I might just close that now. It looks like most of the group correctly identified that it is actually option B. So, that's a very sort of esoteric thing to need to know about, but it's something that reference management software doesn't do a good job of handling, so you as the researcher really need to be aware of that. Now, not everyone attending today will be an APA user, so you'll need to go away and look up how capitalisation needs to be entered for your own referencing style. If you can't find information for your style, my suggestion is that you just make sure you're consistent. When examiners and editors are looking over reference lists, the thing they are looking for is consistency. Now, the other issue with consistency is in relation to author names. So I've got 3 example references here, all written by John Bradley Smith. And I've used EndNote as an example here, but this would apply to any of the reference managers we're discussing today. Now, the issue is, even though they are all written by John Bradley Smith, they have been entered differently. So the first one is his full name, the next one is John B. Smith, and the third one is J.B. Smith. Now, that is going to become an issue when you cite that in the context of a document. And the issue with that is, in-text citations, they're almost like unique identifiers. So the key to an in-text citation is it needs to correctly link up to the reference that you have in your reference list at the end of your document. Now, in situations where you have authors with the same last name but different first names, most reference styles will require you to put initials in, and that way you would be able to tell Jason Smith from John Smith in the reference list. So even though these 3 are actually the same person, you can see why EndNote might get a little bit confused and think that they are actually 3 different authors. So let's take a look at that in the context of a Word document. So in APA format, this is how that gets formatted. So it looks like it's 3 different people, when in fact they are actually all the one person. So golden rule there is, with your author names, particularly if you are having issues where initials are appearing and they're not meant to be, go back and check how your author names have been entered. If you actually fix that up in your reference database, regardless of what software you're using, you will find that that issue resolves itself. Now, issue number 3, problems with in-text citation use. So a really classic mistake that people make with reference management software is they forget to consider that the in-text citations are actually linked back to the software that you're using. So this to us, looking at this document that I have on screen, this just looks like text. It looks like the kind of thing that you could potentially have typed in yourself. But sitting behind those citations are something called field codes. And field codes point your word processor back to the software you're using and tell it which citation you're referring to. Just to show you how that works, I've actually given you a screenshot here. This is what the field codes look like for that citation. So that looks terribly messy and confusing, but that's what EndNote is seeing in this example. We see this. We see the nicely formatted citation. But what's actually happening behind the scenes there is a link that goes back to the software. And that means you need to be really, really careful with the in-text citations that you're generating. So it's a couple things to be aware of here. Firstly, once you have entered an in-text citation, don't manually change it. And I've included an error message there from Zotero that gives you a bit of an idea as to what will happen if you do that. So you've got the in-text citation, it looks just like text to you, and you go in and you perhaps add a page number because it's a direct quote, or you include the words as cited in at the beginning of the brackets to indicate that you're quoting it from someone else. The next time your software updates your document, it's actually going to overwrite those changes. They're not going to be saved as part of the citation, or alternatively, you're going to get error messages. So it's a really bad idea to try and manually change your in-text citations. All of the reference management software has an edit feature that allows you to do things like add page numbers, add suffixes and prefixes and so on. So always make sure you change it through your software rather than changing it in the text yourself. The worst example I have ever come across of that was a PhD student that called us a number of years ago now. She had a 400-page document, and she'd gone through it the last minute, and she had added page numbers into the in-text citations for all of her actual quotes that she'd taken from the literature. She then rescanned the document to generate her final reference list, and of course all of those page numbers were lost. So a 400-page document, I think there were about 50 different instances where she changed page numbers and all of that information was gone. So golden rule, don't make manual changes. Likewise, it's a really bad idea to delete references from your database if you've started writing. So if you think about that complicated looking field code that I had on my previous slide, that's pointing to a particular part of your reference database. So that means if you delete that citation, that link between the two will go. And the screenshot you've got on your slide at the moment, that is from EndNote. That's an example of the kind of message you're going to get. It'll say to you, I'm looking for Smith 2015 at number 30, but it's not there. Can you tell me whereabouts the correct citation is? So they're two really important rules of working successfully with reference management software. Now, PDFs stored in multiple places, which I suspect is an issue for a number of you. So let's just see. We'll just launch another poll on the screen here. So tell me what describes your best methods for storing PDFs. Now, I am referring here to full text PDFs of articles that you download. So I know you'll have other PDFs on your system, but when you're working with library databases, you're downloading your PDFs. Where are you storing them? Where are they going? So option one is that you've got a really good system. You can always find what you need when you need it. You have your PDFs in lots of different places, but you can usually find them. Option number 3, you have PDFs in multiple places and it's a real issue for you. And last option, you know you have PDFs somewhere, but you're not quite sure where. So just giving everyone a chance to vote on that. Actually, it looks like nearly everyone's voting for the same option there. Just checking the question panel, folks. Everyone's been very quiet still, so do feel free to send questions or comments through. Okay, that's interesting. We have the entire group voted for the same option. I've never had that happen before. So you've all got multiple places to store your PDFs. You can usually find them. I might just whip over this next slide quite quickly then, because it sounds like that is less of a problem than I anticipated, but I think it's still worth talking about. So in terms of storing PDFs, something that I see is chaos pretty much. So PDFs are stored across multiple different places on people's computers. So for many people, it's stored in their reference management software. You might also have a copy of the PDF in your documents folder on your computer. You might also have it in Dropbox. For some of you, your My Documents and Dropbox places or locations might be the same. You might also have a favourite app that you use for reading on your mobile device. So you might be using something like iAnnotate, for example, so your PDFs get stored there. And you might have done an NVivo course with Academic Consulting. So we might have suggested that you consider using NVivo for your lit review, and you have a bunch of your PDFs in there also. So the issue with that when they're stored in multiple places is it's a big time waster. So it takes forever to actually locate the file that you need. It's very stressful and frustrating. So another common issue that we see, and something that I'll be giving a few tips on later on. Now, just checking the question panel, we've had a question come through around not deleting references from the database. So in relation to that, I do mean your actual reference management software. So it's fine to delete citations in your word processing document. If you decide not to use it, that's fine. You take the citation out. But the issue is that you're deleting references that you've used in your writing, and therefore the link between the two gets broken. Hopefully that answered that. And another question's come through around my recommendation for storage of PDFs. I have that on a later slide, so I promise I will get to that. Now, number 5 and 6, I'm just going to quickly combine. I've used the famous line from Mastermind, given that that has started on TV again recently. I've started, so I'll finish. So both of the tips that we had, or issues that I mentioned earlier, relate to the same point. Now, when you are doing something that can be a little bit time consuming, particularly like a PhD, you are likely to be doing that over a period of many years, and there will likely be numerous updates released for your software over that time. Now, they are usually available for a good reason. They usually include bug fixes or updates to reference styles. So when you notice that there is an update available for your software, whether that's a new version that's available, or alternatively it might be that it's just a service pack for the current version you're using, it is always a good idea to update. If you don't, you run the danger that your PhD, gosh, that could take 4 or 5 years. At the end of that, you're actually working with an application that's quite outdated and will cause you numerous technical difficulties in the final stages. Having said that, don't update the night before you're due to submit. If you are going to update, make sure you do that well in advance of those final stressful stages. My last comment on that slide is around starting and stopping. So we often see people who are asking us to work on a document where half of the citations are entered via reference management software, the other half are entered in or typed in manually. Really, there's no point even using reference management software if you're going to take that approach. So it's really all or nothing. If you have a half and half approach, it really negates the major advantage of using reference management software, which is that you know anything you've cited will be included in your reference list. Also, be very wary of switching across packages. So I'll be moving shortly into what your options are for reference management software. Think really carefully before you start as to which software package is going to best suit you. So I've said a lot about what not to do. Let's talk about what to do now. So here's our golden rules for working with reference management software. Do take the time to decide upfront which of the applications suits you best. And I've got some tips for that, so I will be talking about that point in a little bit more detail. Be prepared to really learn how to use it, or don't use it at all, is our advice. Reference management software used badly will cause you headaches. To be honest, unless you're actually going to use it to its full advantage, you would be better at manually doing your in-text citations and reference list. So take the time to do training courses, tutorials, lots of blog posts out there on using reference management software tips and tricks, and all of those things can actually save you significant amounts of time. If you have issues, figure out what the problem is and deal with it as and when they occur. So don't have a little problem and then just let it sit there. Chances are that problem's going to reoccur with other citations, so you do actually need to be staying on top of things throughout. My mum is one of these people that loves to have sayings for all sorts of things, and one of her favourite sayings is "a stitch in time saves 9." I think that really applies to reference management software. And lastly, do make sure you have a good workflow in place, and that includes making good use of things like the notes fields and keywords. So I'm going to actually now cover the first and last point on that slide in a little bit more detail. So in terms of deciding which of those packages is for you, now I mentioned 4 software applications earlier on today. They aren't the only 4. There's actually, I think at last count, there were about 27 different reference management applications available. I've restricted today to those 4 because they're the most commonly used, but do be aware there are other options. So when you're looking at what you might use, think about cost and also what licenses your institution makes available. If your institution is supporting a particular software application, that probably means that they believe it will work on the technical systems that they have, and also will be compatible with the library databases that they make available to staff and students. So that's a really good place to start. Also think about where you can get training and support. To be honest, with YouTube having so many videos these days, you can learn how to use most of the software I'm talking about via YouTube videos. But if you have a gnarly question, like you've got an issue with the formatting of a particular citation, probably want to have access to someone who can help you answer those sorts of questions. So think about that before you start using something. Talk to others, but don't be driven by them. So, if someone is very, very negative about something like EndNote or Zotero, chances are they actually haven't used it well. So make sure you talk to a few people before you take recommendations from others. Think about how you work best. So are you needing to share your references with other colleagues? Are you working across multiple computers? Do you just need something that's got cite while you write functions, or are you needing something that will manage your PDFs? So they're all things to think about. And also think about suitability for your operating system or any mobile devices that you use. So, certainly I have said earlier that my recommendation is Zotero, but that's not going to suit everyone. It's not going to suit everyone in terms of their working style, or alternatively, perhaps their technical setup. So it is really up to you to have a look at what's out there and just consider what other people have to say. Now, a question that's come through is whether or not there's good online or other support for Zotero. The tutorials that are available for Zotero are excellent. That is how I taught myself, actually. We also support Zotero here at Academic Consulting. So we have a training course coming up that I will mention at the end of my slides. But we also do one-on-one work with people, and we can help you in the final stages of submitting if you've used it. So Zotero does tick a few of those boxes. And because it's free, you don't need to worry about the cost issue. Now, thinking specifically about the 4 that I mentioned earlier, I thought the easiest thing to do was talk about what they have in common and then talk about what they have that's different. So all 4 packages have a number of different techniques for entering reference information. So you can search and import from online library databases right the way through to manually inputting information if you need. All 4 have the capacity to enter notes, keywords, abstracts, and so on, and that's really why they're such a good personal database for you. They can all be easily searched, which is another bonus. They all allow you to store PDFs, and you can also export. So if you decide that you would like to move to another software package, that's totally an option, and that's something to think about when choosing. You don't want to be locked in to using one particular system. They all have a really big range of citation styles and also allow you to sync up your information. So you can store information locally as well as in the cloud. And there's a number of different options in terms of collaborating with colleagues, which is something I'll talk about. Now, I've had a question come through about storing PDFs in multiple places, what my recommendation is. There is a slide coming up on that shortly. So let's talk about how they're different. So both EndNote and RefWorks you need to pay for. I mentioned earlier, EndNote has a free version, but it is web-based only. Zotero and Mendeley are both freemium, which means they are free, but you pay for extra features. And in the case of those 2 packages, that is storage space. There is various options for sharing your libraries. I've given each of them ratings on the learning curve required, and would definitely rate Zotero and Mendeley as the easiest to learn. If you like mobile apps, there's some information there around that. Third-party apps for Zotero, I know people get slightly put off by that, but they are excellent. I use some of them myself. Storage capacity varies widely, as does the techniques for PDF annotation. Spell check is always a bit of a fiddly thing for reference management software because you don't want, generally speaking, the author field to be picked up. So there's a mix of different options there for spell check across them. They're all compatible with word processor all compatible with word processors, but the degree to which they are varies. So Zotero and EndNote, in my opinion, are the best compatibility for word processors. The last option, you'll notice that that is all yeses for web page captures. So they do all capture web pages, but there's different browsers across the 4 software packages. So, for example, Zotero is compatible with Chrome, Safari, and Firefox. EndNote is only compatible with Internet Explorer or Firefox. So that's something you'd need to investigate for yourselves if you were interested in choosing one of these packages. Now, I mentioned earlier there's even more than those 4. So these aren't applications I want to get into today, but just in case you've maybe tried the 4 packages that I've talked about, you didn't like the look of them, that first table has some other options. And also I've just included various apps that you might like to consider using as well. These have varying compatibility with the various packages we're discussing today. Just to give you an example of what some of these do, BibUp allows you to scan barcodes of books and have that reference information brought across into your Zotero library. Papership is a PDF annotation tool that's compatible with Zotero and Mendeley. I haven't used Papership myself, but I must say it's something that I do want to take a look at. It looks really good. Now let's start to answer some of those questions about PDFs just for the final few slides. So this is a suggested workflow only for working with reference management software and just the way you generally work with literature. So chances are you'll start out with information in library databases. You might have previously saved PDFs and you might have hard copies. And you would bring all of those across into your personal database, whether or not that is RefWorks, EndNote, Zotero, Mendeley, or otherwise. Once it's in, there are some things that I would recommend doing. So the first thing I would do is check that your citation information is correct. I'd also decide how you're going to store the PDF, and as I mentioned, I'll talk about that shortly. And then I'd tag it or file it. So these systems have folder systems. You can tag them with keywords and so on. So you might tag it with a rating, or you might tag it with particular keywords that you're interested in for your research. Nice little tip, if you're really busy and you haven't had a chance to check the citation information or attach PDF to it, you could actually tag it with a keyword that says to check or needs to be reviewed. Once you have done that, you might take some notes. And you might do that either by annotating the PDF or looking at taking that in the notes field. And one thing I like to do at that point is then mark that particular reference as read. Once you've done that, you need to write, which is probably the hard part. So look, that's just a suggested workflow in terms of how you bring your information across and what you do with it once it's in. I think the key things there are around the citation information being checked and also doing any tagging, filing and PDF storage. Now, I had really hoped today to give specific instructions for PDF attachments for each of the 4 software applications that we're talking about, but they all differ widely and they all differ across different versions as well. So it became a little bit of a minefield. So really what I'd suggest here is being aware of how your software stores PDFs when you attach them. So ideally what you're aiming for is a single location for your PDFs, and it will depend on your own preferences and workflow as to where that might be. So take the time to look up the help files for your RMS, know where and how attachments are stored. So they will all be stored in a particular place. Some of them they're stored locally and online. You'll also be able to find out what folder they are stored in. And that becomes really important if you are working across multiple devices. So when you are moving across computers, what you'll often find is that your citations sync up across, but your PDFs don't. And that will be related to whereabouts they're stored. Just to give you an example of what I mean, if you are using EndNote, for example, and you like to access your files from Dropbox, you can change a setting in EndNote so that rather than EndNote saving the PDFs within its own data folder, EndNote will actually link out to your Dropbox folder and all of your attachments will be linked and accessed from there. So that's just an example for one of the RMS systems, just to give you a feel for what I'm talking about there. As I say, I would really love to give you very detailed specifics of how to do that, but it just did become a little bit of a minefield for today. Last couple points. EndNote and Mendeley both have options for renaming your file attachments that are quite neat, so that's worth a look. Also, just be aware of your storage limits. PDFs can take up quite a lot of space. Now, in terms of organising your references themselves, make sure you have a single account and make really good use of folders, keywords, and notes. And they are called different things across the different RMSs. For example, folders in EndNote are custom groups in their collections in Zotero. So folders allow you to make the most of having a single database, and you have sort of subtopics within that. So you might have a folder for your PhD references. You might have another folder for a conference that you're planning to present at. So it's worth finding out about how your RMS sorts this kind of information, just so that you can make the most of how you are organising your citations. And just a last note about collaboration before we finish off. Be a little bit wary when you're looking for RM software. When it says collaboration, sometimes it just means that you can share with colleagues via email or published web pages. And to me, that's actually not collaboration. Collaboration to me is having a group of researchers that can all access the same database, they can edit it, and they can use it for writing papers. So in terms of if you're wanting to do that, Zotero would absolutely be my pick. But given that so many of you are using EndNote, you will be pleased to know that EndNote has good collaboration options for up to 14 researchers. And both EndNote and Zotero there are no additional charges for group sharing. Mendeley, though, it does have some excellent capacity, but there are quite significant costs involved. So in terms of what we recommend, no surprises, Zotero, and I've talked about that throughout. So I'll just leave you with that information around courses that we have coming up. So the course that's coming up on the 15th of June still does have places, and I will be going into much more detail and very much the how-to of all of the points that I've talked about in today's presentation. So if you are interested in that, you can register via our website. And I've also just included some additional links that you might find helpful. Now that's dead on 12 o'clock, so if people do need to head off, I would completely understand. If you can hold on just for a moment, just a wee suggestion for you. I'm launching another quick poll. I would aim to do something. Have an action point for yourself after today's webinar. So have a think about what you'd like to do. Are you going to actually have a try of one of the 4 packages I've talked about? Are you going to go away and sort out your PDFs? Will you watch some tutorials on how to best use the current software that you're utilising? Are you going to work through and make sure all that reference information is accurate and consistent? Or are you going to take a look at your workflow options? So just while you're voting on that, I'll take final questions. So still time to put questions through if you'd like. So someone's asked about if you want to change between reference management software. It does vary. So it is possible, for example, to go from EndNote to Zotero, and all of your attachments that you have entered will come across. Can be a little bit fiddly though, but generally speaking, it's totally possible to move between software using something called an RIS format, which is a standard interchange format. Attachments don't always move with that, so it would be worth actually having a chat either with us or perhaps your library staff at your institution before you make the move. So the short answer is yes, it's possible to move from software to software with your current database, but you'll need to just be a little bit careful about that. Okay, I'll just close that poll and share that with everyone while I am still taking those final questions. So just a comment from someone, yes, in terms of the additional storage, would you need to pay for extra storage for a master's thesis? That's a really good question. Look, I'd say not. We were trying to work that out this morning. We think you'd probably get away with about 500 references stored with attached PDFs in Zotero before you'd hit your limit, but it will depend on the size of them. So I would think for a master's level thesis, you would probably be able to get away with the free package and not have to pay for storage. And just the last question I can see there, can I make some comment about travelling libraries? This has caused problems in the past. Yes, travelling libraries can be problematic. I'll have a chat to my colleague Andrew and see if I can send you some information offline on that. Because I no longer use EndNote, I don't feel expert enough to comment on that one, but we'll get back to you after the session. So looking at the poll results, looks like lots of you are going to go away and try one of the packages that we talked about. So that's great. And we've got a fair few people going to have a look at sorting out their PDFs as well. So as always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. As you can probably tell, it's something we are very passionate about, and we're always happy to field questions if you have them. Do try and find out the answers to your questions sooner rather than later. So nothing worse than being in the final stages of producing a document and having issues with the software that you're using. So I won't do a poll on who found that fascinating versus boring, because as I said, that's probably revealing on your personality. But I do hope that you at the very least found some tips that were useful for today, and do let me know if I can be of any further assistance.